Good morning, everybody. Today is Thursday, October 17th, 2024, and this is the Finance Committee meeting of the Darien Board of Education. The first item on the agenda is the review of the September 2024 financial report. Mr. Rudel.
So this is the financial report through September. We are forecasting a surplus of $2,059. So this is an improvement of $60,307 from last month. To go over the changes, we did reconcile most of our software to actuals, and there was savings of about $26,500, and we can go through some of those items a little bit later. We have salary savings from a maternity leave of just over $17,000. We have some ESY certified salary savings of about $16,000. We will have another custodian on the new salary schedule in November, so that's a prorated $9,469 in savings. We have salary savings from an unfilled groundskeeper, which has just recently been filled for $5,000. Sewer came in slightly less at $1,600, and that's just a product of consumption. We did get a workers' comp reimbursement for $1,494. We did get a credit from a DSS provider for $1,180. And then we had some savings in the 401A due to vacant positions of just over $770. And then a deficit, we do have two ELP students who will change from paying to special education for $19,475. So overall, the general education RCs are a positive $11,980, while the special education RCs are a deficit of $9,921 for that balance of $2,059. Just going through the RCs where the savings are. There's no change in RC 1 or 3. RC 10, as I mentioned, we do have a custodian who will be retiring. And so we'll have a new custodian on the new salary schedule for savings of $9,469. Moving to facilities, RC 12. The salary savings for the groundskeeper position is slightly higher, just over $15,000. Moving to RC 15 software, as I mentioned, we did have savings of just over $26,000. There is a superintendent adjustment to move that to resource materials in RC 19 due to the loss of Title I funding. As you can see, it's largely small savings across a number of titles between Microsoft, Aspen, Snap, Pick My Kid, DocuSign, Fay, Nearpod, Turnitin, School Messenger, Encyclopedia Britannica, Scholastic, Foreign Language Lamp, FunHub, and Text Help, all totaling just over $26,000. RC 18 salary savings, we do want to note that the total is $106,776, so about $6,000 more than budget. Turnover, while the turnover number hasn't changed, the number of teachers increased by 2. We did have 2 resignations since the last month, so that count is 42. The change will be reflected in savings hopefully next month when those positions are filled. RC 19, as we mentioned previously, professional development does have a deficit of $32,000 due to the loss of Title I funding. And then there is a transfer recommended to the board to extinguish that deficit. RC 23 provider payments for summer school came in under budget by $1,180, as we did receive a credit from an outside vendor. Going to RC 24, we did note that we had 2 vacant OT positions. Those have been filled, and so all 5 have been filled. It's likely that next month you'll see a transfer recommended to take the savings from salary savings to contracted services to help offset the balance of contracted services for when those were unfilled. Excess cost, just as a reminder, we did budget at $2.6 million and a reimbursement rate of 70%. That first filing is due on December 1st. RC 25 workers' comp, we did get a small reimbursement from Kerma for just under $1,500. And then, as I mentioned earlier, sewer shows a positive balance of $1,681 due to less consumption. And then ELP, as I mentioned, we do have 2 students that will not be paying students for a deficit of $19,475.
Any questions? Go ahead, Greg.
A question on the technologies, software. Can you give someone else?
So there's savings of the $26,500 for those various software titles. There's a superintendent's adjustment in the packet to take those savings and cover the loss of Title I funding in part for resource materials.
The savings themselves, what was that?
So some of it was renewals came in less than anticipated. So things like Aspen and Microsoft, the renewal came in less than anticipated. Some of the smaller, it could be the number of licenses that we needed. Because some of the licenses are tied to enrollment. So if your enrollment is different, then you'll have smaller savings there.
Greg, put on your, like, I think.
There we go. Do we think that that's like a go forward?
So your
savings,
base
or-
will be lower for your renewal. So for example, like Microsoft, your base will be about $4,000 lower, but you're still going to get a renewal increase from Microsoft going
Okay.
forward.
Thanks.
Any other questions on the financial? Okay, so let's go to the transfers.
So there's two transfers recommended for approval. The first is for $32,000, and that is to cover the remaining loss of Title I funding that would go to RC 19 professional development. We are recommending taking the funding from savings and workers' comp due to that credit. The savings for the 401A due to vacancies, the remaining savings in the teacher aid and special education due to the new salary schedule. The provider payment credit that we got for DSS, the savings in elementary intramural since they're only running at one school. Salary savings from the new custodian schedule in RC1 as well as RC10, and then the sewer savings that I mentioned earlier. And then the second transfer is for $19,475, and that is the ELP tuition, and then recommending taking the savings from ESY as well as the savings from the custodian due to the new salaries.
Any questions on the transfers? Go ahead.
Sorry, I did have one question on the, I think it's speech pathologist that we are a speech therapist. We still have a vacant
We do.
position, so that's still open.
So that is still open. At some point when that gets filled, we'll likely take the salary savings from that position, then move it into contract
Okay, thank you.
services.
I don't have questions in the transfers.
Anything else? Any other question? So we're okay recommending the board to go ahead with the transfers? I'm
Yes.
seeing nods, yes. Okay. Okay, and then review of fiscal year 26 pro forma. I guess I just want to preface this by saying this last year was the first year we did what I called kind of the baked in expense analysis forecast. What we tried to do this year is enhance that with some commentary and in greater detail, trying to do it a little earlier. This is, pre-budget process for fiscal year 26. I think the goal is to best inform our board in terms of what we're looking at. And also, I think as importantly, inform the community and our partners in town government to inform them of what we're looking at as we go forward and look forward to the budget season. I would say, after going through last year's budget revision process, what we're trying to do is inform or provide more detail on what we're looking at in the hopes of we could get some sort of feedback or guidance before the superintendent brings out his budget from the fiscal authority, meaning the Board of Finance, in conjunction with, what else is going on around town. I mean, as we learned last year, although, we have total responsibility over the Board of Ed budget, it's a piece of a pie in terms of the townwide budget. And so I think the goal here is in this meeting, is to review the document that's been brought forth. If there's enhancements that are desired in terms of informing the board or other areas that we want admin to look into or consider as a baked in expense, if you will, or pro forma budget item, we inform them from this committee and then bring it forth to the Board of Ed. But I do think this is a very worthwhile exercise, and it was very helpful last year, even though we did have to go through a revision process. Perhaps we can avoid some of that if we can get some input from the Board of Finance before we go into budget season. And I think on the Board of Selectmen side, I had brief comment discussion with John Zagrodsky, and I think he would welcome some feedback also in the bigger picture. So.
Let's speak a minute to how this board can use this document. We talked a little bit about informing the other town bodies, but in terms of how this board should be using it before we go into the budget process. This represents just a financial piece of information. We have to have other conversations.
Oh, yeah. So, yeah. So this is, again, this is, we're trying to outline, if you will, the big budget drivers and maybe potential offsets. We're not going to discuss the merits of each one, but if there are, I do want to review it. And if we are missing items when we bring it forth to the board, we highlight that. I don't know if I'm missing something there, Jill, or if you want to add to that.
Well, I think the other piece is for everyone to come in and understand what our starting point is. And we got there at a high level, but we didn't, the idea is that everybody going into the budget process really knows the drivers and understands how to interpret them before we start. Because when we talk about prioritization, we need to understand the components that are informing the budget at a deeper level. This isn't the prioritization conversation. That will come later.
Got it. Okay, so I guess, Rich, if you at a high level, we all have the memo, but maybe as you do with our, the earlier agenda items, just pick some of the highlights to the memo as you walk through it in terms of what the drivers are and what the potential offsets could be.
So as with most years, the drivers are going to be your wages, your benefits, and usually special education. So in terms of the forecasted salaries, you have contracts in place for all your bargaining units except for the maintenance and custodial unit. So forecasting those individuals forward for their applicable step and or anniversary increase, you're looking at just under $3 million worth of expenses, which is about 2.5% of your budget. Insurance.
2.5 percentage points of the total increase, right?
Correct.
Yes.
Yep. So if nothing else changed and it was only that, you'd be at 2.5%. Insurance and benefits make up a large portion. As we've talked about in the past, we do have very poor claims. While they're not great, they're at 118% loss ratio. This time last year, we were at 134% loss ratio. So while bad, we are better than we were last year. So we do have in here, we do have a rate cap because we did join a consortium. We worked with our insurance consultant and our current insurance provider to have a rate cap of 11.9%. If we didn't have that rate cap, we'd be looking at an 18% insurance increase, which would be about $800,000 more than what we're showing here. The likelihood of it being below 11.9 is almost 0%. Our claims are pretty poor. We do have a couple of claims that are over $1 million just for individuals. We have a significant amount of people in that band of $100,000 to $250,000. We've looked at alternative options, which include the state plan. The state plan is a self-insured through the state PPO plan, so it is not a high deductible plan. If you do join that plan, you do have to make a 3-year commitment, and then you have no control over whatever the annual increases are set by the state. Currently, that state plan is about $1.3 million more expensive than what we're showing here at 11.9. It used to be a couple $1 million more, and so that gap has narrowed considerably, but it is still more expensive. We have looked at other models such as self-insured. The concern with self-insured is typically when you're self-insured, you have two what's called stop loss insurance policies, individual stop loss and aggregate stop loss. Usually individual stop loss insurance will range anywhere from $100,000 to $250,000, which means you're picking up the expense for the first $100,000 or $250,000 worth of an employee's claims. And then if it's over that amount, the stop loss insurance picks up. The higher your stop loss limit is, the lower your premiums typically are because you're taking on more risk. Because we have such high claims, the cost of stop loss insurance is quite prohibitive. If we were in a self-insured model for last year, it would have been a couple $1 million more than what we paid for a fully insured PPO or fully insured high deductible insurance claim. So self-insurance is not really a viable option given where our claims are. Other items, we have non-personnel increases. That's primarily the bus contract.
Can we just stop there? Because I think there might be, I have a question. What is the 118% loss ratio? What does the loss ratio mean?
So it means for every dollar we give Anthem, they're paying out $1.18. So they're spending 18% more than we're giving them in premiums. And so what ends up happening is they're going to take that, they're going to look at that loss ratio and say, how many of those claims are likely to continue? How many of them will, let's say, drop off? And that's how they bake into your premium. So when you're spending 118% more, it essentially means Anthem's losing money on Darien.
In this 1 year though, right?
Correct. In this 1 year, in the trailing 12.
If you were to average like the 5 year, what do you think the loss
So
rate?
the last 3 years have been worse. So last year was 134%. So we've almost cut it in half. Before that, we were at 120. If you were to go back 5 years, we were actually below 100%. And so when you're below 100%, so if you were to look back, 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago, when your premiums were going up 2 or 3 or 4%, it's because your loss ratio was better.
Greg, do you have any other follow-ups on this?
Yeah, just on the, I'm just reading through some of the details, which maybe I haven't gone through yet. Like, there's $4 million of cancer claims. There's 42 high claimant individuals with totally another almost $4 million. So $8 million of claims. Like, what's that seems like a big number.
It is. So we do have a high number of cancer claims. And so remember, it's not just the employees who work here, it's any covered life. So it could be a spouse, it could be a child, or it could be the employee. So we have a lot of long-term cancer claims. And so what's happening is you're spending a lot of money, but it's dragging on. And so we might have had $1 million in the last trailing 12, but that individual would have been more than $1 million if you were to look back in the last 24.
Do you have any sense for how, like, the magnitude of our claims versus other districts?
Sure. So us in the DERG, us in Westport have experienced probably the worst health insurance claims in the last 3 years. Westport, for example, last year got a 40% renewal rate. Ridgefield right now is probably the best. They were actually below 100%. And so they've been able to have annual increases of, 1 or 2 or 3%. And it really kind of fluctuates based on your pool. Like I said before, 10 years ago, we were in a period where you had really good claims and your insurance renewals were really low. And that's why you see some of the budgets 10 years ago were in the twos. Now that your insurance renewals are, double digits, you're seeing budgets that are in the 4s and the 5s. Last year's renewal was just under 14%. And so this year's renewal will likely be about 12%, so better, but obviously still high.
Yeah, still a big increase. Is it correlated with the general age of our? Or no?
No, not really. I mean, if we look at, we don't have the names of the individuals, obviously.
Yeah.
But you have some of them, like I said, are kids. It's not necessarily the employee, and some of them are spouses, and so the ages range.
You've once said it tends to be cyclical also.
It does. I mean, usually districts go through a period where you have really high claims and they last for a while and then they kind of dip back down. So we're almost like when I talk to individuals in Richfield, we're almost like the inverse of them. So when we had really good claims, they had terrible claims. Now we have terrible claims, and they have really good claims. And so we're almost kind of like the inverse of them. It's really, excuse me, it's really just, the type of claims that you're getting, are they claims that are going to last a long time? So cancer claims, for example, tend to last a long time because it's not something that like you take a pill and then all of a sudden you're good. The other thing we've seen is our pharmacy claims have exponentially gone up. Those are up about 30%. And that just means that the pool of individuals that we insure are using more medication.
And in terms of coverage options, are there different coverage options, or are we just assuming the same thing?
So we have to provide similar coverage to our employees based on what we currently have. Every year we do shop who our program is. So currently our program provider is Anthem. Every year we go through a process of putting that out to bid. The district had Connecticut for a while and we moved to Anthem. There's Aetna, there's some others out there. When we looked last year at putting it out to bid, the bids were significantly higher to change. And so one of the things we've done is we've joined a consortium of about 14 different districts/municipalities as a consortium, and it's kind of like a purchasing block consortium. And so what we do is we take all those communities together and say the book of business is worth, $250 million. If we're going to give Anthem, in this case, $250 million, how can we drive those claims down? Because they're going to get such a large book of business. And so that's helped us with things like rate caps. So that instead of being that 18% renewal, we're paying that 12% renewal. That's proven to be relatively successful, though obviously still high renewal.
Thanks.
One question just on the pharmacy claims piece. Are there other things that we can do in terms of negotiating better pharmacy kind of contractual things? Because I know that healthcare companies sometimes work with that as well.
They do. So our insurance consultant is Brown & Brown, and they do try to work on that. You are seeing a lot of hospitals in the area, whether it's Yale or Stanford or Norwalk, pushing back for much higher reimbursement rates. And so that's also a driving factor.
Okay, I just also one more question, just on the unsettled contracts, going back to the salary piece. What was the assumption in this base level pro forma for those unsettled
So we
contracts?
typically don't share that because then you'd be bargaining in bad faith with those unions.
But there's a
There is a
placeholder
placeholder.
in here. Okay,
Yep.
thank you.
So you were going to go non-personnel
Yep.
increases?
So the bulk of the non-personnel increases is your bus contract. We do have a 7% increase in the bus contract going into next year. There are some smaller things like the elevator contract, the garbage contract, the annual audit, the lease at Fitch, for example. Those all make up that non-personnel increase. As we've talked about this year, we do have grant compression. We did lose the Title I funding, and so it's another $135,000. As we talked about last year, the wellness coordinator at the high school was funded its first year entirely out of a grant. This current year, it's 2/3 out of a grant and 1/3 in the operating budget. Next year, if it's to continue, it'll have to be 2/3 in the operating budget, 1/3 in the grant, and then the following year would be 100% in the operating budget. This past year, there were deferrals in athletic uniforms and district technology, and that's 135,000. The technology replacement cycle, based on what was provided last year, would be another $150,000. Special education anticipated tuition increases, and while this might change depending on outcomes, right now it's anticipated to be another $630,000. And then contracted services, whether it be speech, OT, PT, things like that, would be another $178,000. The demographer report from last year does indicate another section at the elementary school based on the current Board of Ed class size guidelines. We do have another demographer report set for the first week in November, so this could change both up or down. But as of right now, you would need another $106,000 for one more section. The right to read that we've talked about, the placeholder is $650,000, and that's a mandate from the state. And so that alone is a half point on your budget. So when we talked about salaries, for example, if nothing else happened but salaries and you were at 2.5, those two things would bring you over 3%.
Wait,
Yeah, sorry,
You go.
just one question on the $650,000, which I assume is kind of a placeholder. Is it mandated that we need to basically pay $650,000, or could it be less if we choose to
So
augment?
it could be less or more depending on,
That's essentially what it's going to cost us though to cover the whole district.
Regardless.
so could you guys just put a little detail around that? In terms of what that entails?
Yeah. Now or later?
Now would be great.
Yeah, most of those materials will be textbooks, resources that the kids will use and or the teachers going to use.
Okay.
I would just say that the curriculum committee has talked about this at length. If anyone is interested in going back to those videos, there's quite a bit of detail on how we expect that to play out following the pilot this year.
Yeah, and just to piggyback on that, I think we talked about it last week, right? So we had a meeting, we talked about it at length. I thought where we came out was that it's unclear if we're even going to decide to move forward with the Right to Read program. So it's not like a definitive, yes, we're choosing this. We're reviewing this. We're going to collect feedback. We're going to see if we think it makes sense. And then after we collect all that information, we will decide on the path forward. But my understanding of the state mandate is there's not like you have to do this much in terms of implementation. There's a lot of vagueness in terms of what the actual implementation is required to look like.
Well, I would just-
Oh, sorry.
Let Alan go, please, because
Yeah, so just the general timeframe we were talking about is bringing back a recommendation in December. That's kind of what we've been working on. Where that will land is, as you say, Greg, a wee bit up in the air, right? I'm not going to just force a square peg in a round hole because the state says, you have to have this, right? So whatever the reality is, if it's done, dusted and completed and a big firm recommendations in place, then fine. If it's not, we'll have to incrementally discuss that and bring it to the subcommittee of the board.
But my question is, I don't think we can pay nothing. Is that correct?
What do you mean we can't pay nothing?
You're saying it'll be 650,000. Isn't the mandate that we have to purchase one of these
Yeah, well,
or no?
The answer to that is technically yes. I don't know that this board would want to, nor would I would suggest that if we're not ready, or we have a different recommendation process, or it's literally a different recommendation, that that we wouldn't hold ourselves to that, to be honest with you, because
But so if we choose to augment what we currently have, and this is
Yes.
kind of what Greg was alluding to, and Katie, I think that if we chose to augment what we're doing currently and purchase those pieces,
Yes.
that is how it potentially could be less than 650,000,
Yes, it could be.
correct?
Yes,
Yeah,
yes,
okay.
could it be? Yes, yes.
Yeah.
So more to come on this,
Yeah.
clearly. Katie, did you have another comment or?
I would just suggest going back to the curriculum committee because I think that that is a clearer picture. But I think what Alan said is closest. Yeah.
Okay.
I think the other thing that was discussed in curriculum is that as a board, we're going to keep a placeholder because it's important to have a placeholder, but we're not going to tie the decision to the budget timeline. So there is a placeholder in place, but the academic decision will be academic and we'll leave time for the academic decision to roll out in its fullness because it's important.
Not to force the issue unnecessarily.
Correct. Correct. So we have a placeholder so that we can move forward with our budget process at pace.
Sorry, I think, did you finish, Rich, everything? or-
Just quickly, if you recall, obviously, we made a change to how we provide special education transportation. We started that in effectively September, and then we did contract out for ESY. So you have a credit that will come to the budget by not using per student for the summer school for ESY. And so that's a reduction to the budget. So all these items in total is about 5.5%. Should I go through the initiatives and the drivers? or-
Yeah, well, you just at a high level, because again, we've actually discussed some of the initiatives already at recent board meeting, but just highlight that.
So we've talked about some of the initiatives, whether it be the facilities condition study, expansion of EduPlanet, website redesign, PLCs and transition program. That's a little over $1.2 million if you were to do all of them. So that plus the pro forma gets you to about 6.5%. As we mentioned, in terms of key drivers, the collective bargaining agreements make up 45% of that total increase. Health insurance makes up about 20% of that total increase. Special ed is about 12%. The loss of grants will add another 2% of that total increase. And then the right to read mandate is about 10% of that total increase. We did want to highlight, if we did not do the special education change and busing from this current year to next year, the budget pro forma, instead of being 5.5, would be a little over 6%. We have realized savings of about $700,000, which is about $200,000 more than anticipated, as we did get less individuals who elected to take health insurance.
It's 200,000 more.
So the document we prepared last year conservatively showed everybody taking health insurance. And so that net savings in the first year was about $500,000. It's really closer to 700,000.
And what was the total capital outlay to drive these in?
It's about 740,000, I believe.
So a 1-year payback,
Correct.
almost 1 year.
Almost 1 year.
Pretty awesome. And then Teen Talk. We put that in initiatives, even though it's ongoing, because the grant is not secured, correct?
The grant covers the current year
Yeah.
at the middle school. The board's already paying for the high school version of Teen Talk. And so if Teen Talk at the middle school were to continue, the board would have to fund that portion.
Or a portion of it, right? You know, if there
If there was another grant.
Yeah. So that's why it's in the initiatives. And then I guess, when is the special education overview that Shirley's?
I think it's the second meeting in November.
Yeah, that's on the master calendar. No.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, because that's a key driver that keeps popping up.
That'll also include that transition program.
Okay. Okay. Any questions regarding, go ahead, Kate.
I don't have questions about this specifically, but I did kind of want to come back to the overall exercise and kind of how it was introduced. The way that Jill framed it, I fully support as an exercise in advance for everyone to understand what our key drivers are. I think this is really helpful, in terms of receiving a comprehensive and detailed budget book without surprises, to know kind of like what range we're looking at, what costs are fixed, And again, not being surprised with new initiatives, right? Being able to really have conversations about the merit of things before it becomes a conversation of how and if we're going to pay for them. So from that standpoint, I'm wholly supportive and think that this is a great exercise. Rich, thank you for the way that you laid this out so clearly, with a 5.5% of kind of fixed costs. John, the comments that you made about receiving guidance and this being an exercise so that the Board of Finance can tell us where we should be, that I disagree with. I think just like with the placeholder that we're putting in place for curriculum and that we're not tying ourselves to a deadline and to a number that we need to see what is going to be best for our students and for our district, that very education first mindset is one that we need to stay committed to. I want to see us developing a budget that meets students' needs, that is in being informed by what our district needs, and then we see what the cost is, as opposed to backing into a number and trying to make it fit and saying, from someone outside of education, the Board of Education saying, this is what you get, make it work.
Yeah, I don't think I said it just quite like that. I think last year was an exercise in some of us learning that we don't have a printing press and we are not the fiscal authority. And so if we can get a range of what the fiscal authority sees on a town-wide basis and not plug it in. I mean, clearly we have a responsibility to meet the needs of our students. But we also have a reality that we don't have the final say in the number that's allocated towards our budget. So there's a happy medium there, Katie, in which we do not just go forward with no sort of understanding of what the town-wide limitations are. If we do that and continue to do that, if you add up the man hours and women hours that have been put in, not only on our front, but also the administration's front, with a non-informed view of what those limitations might be in the townwide budget, is an incredible waste of time. So if we can find a happy medium in getting some guidance and some input from the fiscal authority, we can choose to ignore it and go through the same exercise we did last year if it gets cut by or the increase gets reduced. But I think this is very worthy to get some input from the Board of Finance, not just a person of the Board of Finance, and have see a transparent discussion on their front. And we can subscribe to that, or we can choose not to, and then deal with the consequences later if there are consequences. So yeah, I agree. We're not budgeting to plug in a number, but the exercise of budgeting is to use the dollar's efficiency of the taxpayers. So, we might have a bit of a philosophical difference here, and that will be the board's decision whether or not, one, if we receive guidance to use it, and two, it will be the board's decision whether or not to do that. But at least this information is out there early enough. And so that's a full understanding, not only by board members of what the drivers are, but what the community is and other fiscal authorities. So that's the way I see it. Greg?
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with you, John, just in terms of what we have to have a governor. If the number said 100% increase, I think we'd all say, well, some things we can't do that. If you have 20 clubs, can you have 200 clubs? There's governors on all this stuff. So you have to pick. And it goes to my next point, which was for some of this, I don't know necessarily like for every line item, but it might be helpful generally to have like what's discretionary versus non-discretionary.
That's a great point. I think,
and some of this stuff we know is like, and there's actually an in between.
Yeah.
Like I think about like some of this contract stuff where the word contract in my mind says we have to spend these dollars no matter what, but there is a discretionary component to that in terms of, well, I think we get to choose how many FTEs there are. So there's parameters around that and all that. So
Yeah.
but I think that having some of that, not necessarily every single line item within the whole budget, but to some extent in here so that we as a board know going in, this line is fully discretionary. We are making the decision to spend this money or not. It's not a requirement. I think that would be really helpful.
yeah, well, it's a great point. And, maybe we can kind of work on that and refine it. Because we were thinking about that on the initiatives too, like, state mandated initiatives versus, I don't want to call them nice to haves, but, board priorities or something like that. So let's talk a little more like idea generation and maybe guide at the board meeting, how we can.
Yeah, any direction you want to give in that, because I mean, fundamentally it's going to come down to staffing, right? Yeah, of course you have the discretion, you have discretion in class size, you have discretion. It all comes back to these big buckets, personnel. Otherwise, if in any of these potential initiatives we want to do, so if there's any sort of clarity around that, like any further clarity you need, we're happy to do it.
Go ahead, Rob.
Thank you, Rich, because I do think that this is a really helpful exercise and I really like how you've laid it out. So thank you for that. I hope that this will be taken into account by other bodies in our town, because this clearly shows in my mind that we have significant increased costs, many of which we do not control based on the contractual healthcare increases, the special education increases, as you've noted in this memo, and state mandates. And that really does not leave us a lot of room for flexibility, unfortunately. And it kind of leads to, a base level of spending that I don't think we have a lot of control over. So I'm hopeful that at the end of the day, we're able to create a Board of Education recommended budget that really meets our student needs, because that's the most important piece for our town. And again, that is our mandate as Board of Education members. It is our budget. And I think that we need to really keep an eye on that as well. And obviously, what happens in the overall town budget, the Board of Finance has a say in that and can give a guidance. But I do want to say that on the potential initiatives, we do have unfunded state mandates, but I also think that we have some discretion, I believe, in how much we choose to spend on state mandated items. And I think, for instance, within play-based learning, even how much we spend on the different pieces that are needed for that, or with Right to Read. Again, I would want to listen to our teachers and the committee that is coming up with what they believe is the best solution for us, and then go from there. And maybe it's not a $650,000 item. It could be less. Again, also with the transition program, and I appreciate that you've netted out potential tuition savings out of that cost. I do still think it might be appropriate at least to kind of think about, well, this is an option to do this in-house. Is this the best option, or what would it be if we continue to do it the way we do? And I definitely want to make sure that we're looking at all different possibilities. And if we're able to do it better and more cost effectively by doing it in-house, then maybe that's the best option. But I do want to know if this is an annual number and operating cost, or if there are additional capital costs that would be included as well. And I think hopefully we would get more information on
So
that.
these are only operating
Okay.
costs.
And does this include the rent?
Yes.
It does.
It's a placeholder for rent,
Okay.
because there isn't a location necessarily determined.
Okay. And then just one question on the PLC piece, because that's additive to what we did in this past year's budget. Can you just give a little bit more clarity on what that 219,000
Yeah,
is?
so we have administration, staff, members of PDEC working on providing what I'll call professional learning community time, additional time. I'll call it additional time for staff K to 12 to meet on a regular basis around the work of curriculum, plan interventions for kids, administer assessments. Just you're giving them more professional learning time. What that looks like, will be bringing back a couple of models of what that might look. Look, if you want to sort of crystallize some of it, maybe, right? I'm not saying this is the case. Maybe at the secondary level, I'm talking about the high school. Every week, maybe have it an hour and a half on a Thursday morning, right? That's just I don't want to throw out ideas but if you want to just sort of or it could be a half day on a Wednesday for the whole district, or it could be, I know it's getting people now thinking, but I don't want to get people scared or otherwise, right? But just to give you a sense, to build in, elementary teachers are on a treadmill. Many of them don't even have team time. They're giving up their own prep time for team time. we want to build the capacity of the staff. We want to provide them the time that they need to do the work, which is really all focus on the students. So that's, for now, that's as much as I can.
So the money represents
Busing.
busing primarily, and then because the district uses food service revenue to provide a subsidy, there would be a potential loss in revenue there too.
Okay, thank you.
Any questions over the side? Okay, and then maybe there's a section, potential efficiencies, district comparisons, and I don't want to get into detail here, but what does district comparisons refer to? I mean,
So a lot of times we'll take a look at some of our peer districts. So
Okay.
whether it's Westport, New Canaan, Wilton, Greenwich as an example, are there things they're doing differently than we are? Can we learn from how they're doing things? So do they have a certain staffing model that maybe we could adopt that could create an efficiency or a savings? And then as Dr. Adley mentioned, obviously, if you're going to have some type of reduction, it's likely to be around staff.
okay,
So for what's there, clearly, and I think the board recognizes, and perhaps even this committee recognizes the sensitivity of discussing things. If the board comes back to me and says, you need to reduce some things, this is typically well, I might look at some of this stuff anyway, right? But ultimately, wise of supervision and security, I'll be looking at campus monitor, security staff. I'll just be reassessing that. That's typically that I would do that. The completion of 4 to 5 at Middlesex, we have I think 2 teachers left to go there. So we need 2 teachers to step out. Forgive me for saying that, but that just, if 2 teachers retire in the right areas, we would complete that there. Staffing and programs means exactly what it says, right? That's anything from class sizes, paraprofessionals, other staff. I mean, there's only so many ways, depending on a reduction, if there is a reduction. And athletics, the board has asked for some reductions in athletics. My fear is I'll be bringing back things that you haven't
Yeah.
supported in the past, to be honest with you, right? Because while we would like to see, or there's a desire to see savings in athletics, that comes down to reducing programs, staff, and coaches, opportunities for kids too. But anyway, I mean, that's as much as I feel comfortable saying at this point without.
those are the buckets that you would traditionally look at if you had to find efficiencies offset a budget increase.
Assuming we can't hit some of the contractual stuff and healthcare and all that
Understood.
sort of stuff.
Yeah, okay. Okay, any other questions about this document or comments? Go ahead, Katie.
Just thinking back about our conversation regarding the rising costs of healthcare and noting that it's cyclical. I do wonder, and not expecting any really further conversation at this table, but just kind of putting it out there. I do wonder if we have explored or if other people have explored wellness incentives, just in terms of making sure that people have the resources and the opportunities to take care of themselves. Education has been.
So we have, if our drivers for insurance were like small type of illnesses, it's like wellness incentives are a great way to kind of drive that down. But what's driving our cost isn't necessarily like wellness issues. They're, chronic illnesses and things like that. We do offer wellness incentives and we do try to, we provide that opportunity for people to make sure they're getting like an annual physical and things like that. But it's not really it's not the driver of the cost.
Yeah, and I understand that. I guess I just more wanted to say broadly that we talk a lot about making sure that we're taking care of the whole student. And I want to make sure that we're taking care of our staff as whole humans as well. So thanks for mentioning that has been a consideration.
Good question. Anything else?
Just one question.
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Just in terms of district comparisons, I want to look at, or I'm interested in the busing component as well, because we were able to find savings on the special education front by insourcing some of that. And I guess my question, because this has come up in previous board discussions at various points in time, if there's any way to find additional savings potentially on a broader scale with busing, if we did more in-house
So.
as opposed to.
So the answer is not really.
Well,
So one, you don't have anywhere to park the large 72 passenger buses. Unfortunately, Darien's a community that doesn't attract interest in other bus companies bidding because you don't have anywhere to park them. The time it takes, so if you were to, let's say, insource all of your home to school buses, it takes about a year and a half to get a bus, like a bus that size. So you would have to basically decide today to buy buses and find a location in order to make it work for August of 25. And even that would be like a timeframe that's not likely. I mean, part of the reason bus costs are going up so much is nobody wants to be a bus driver anymore, right? And so in order to attract bus drivers, they're offering higher wages, they're offering sign-on bonuses, and then they're just passing it off onto everybody else.
If we could wave a magic wand and find a parking lot for a depot, I mean, what would the savings?
So the rent for the depot that per student pays is, probably, $400,000 or $500,000
A year?
yeah, and then you'd have to net it against whatever you're gonna pay
Got it.
for that. You're probably, if that was even a realistic option, you're probably 5 years away from being able to implement something like that.
Sorry to interrupt, but Rich, when you said like 400 to 500, would that be for the same size of fleet that we would need? Or is that for like their entire
Same.
Fairfield count? The same?
No, same size of fleet, and then obviously you would need bays for them to work on the buses. You would need, a place for the drivers to be at. And then if you were to insource everything too, then you're gonna have to hire mechanics to, work on the buses. You need a safety manager, you need a location. I mean, there's a lot that goes into having all 25 of those buses if you were to do it yourself.
So what does New Canaan do when they're parking up at the high school? They have a depot right there?
No, they have like a little spot that the location manager and the dispatch sit at.
Yeah,
And then they have mechanics on site who will work
got
on
it.
the bus.
Okay.
And we're probably, well, not probably, we are at capacity of handling anything else internally here.
Yeah, that's true too. All right, well, it's a complex issue, but it's a significantly rising cost, so worthy of the questions. All right, anything else before we go to public comment? Okay, public comment, please.
Good morning. If anybody in person or online would like to participate in public comment, please approach the podium or use the raised hand icon. Please state your name and address for the record, and you will have up to 3 minutes to comment. We have no raised hands and nobody.
And
in the
there's no
audience.
one in the room, so I get a motion to adjourn?